They stopped a black woman at immigration because they thought she didn't belong there, never realizing she was the one person in that terminal the country could not afford to delay. The line moved in slow, weary inches beneath the cold white lights of Terminal B at Reagan National Airport, where the air always felt over-filtered, the floors gleamed too brightly, and every face seemed caught between exhaustion and suspicion. Rolling suitcases clicked over polished tile. A baby cried somewhere near customs. A flight attendant in navy heels passed by with the stiff smile of someone trying to outrun the end of a long shift. And in the middle of it all stood Naomi Carter, calm as still water, one hand resting on the handle of a small black carry-on, the other wrapped around a dark blue passport, holder worn smooth at the edges. She wore a charcoal coat over a cream blouse. Nothing flashy, nothing careless, but there was something in the way she stood that made people look twice. Not because she demanded attention, because she refused to shrink. Naomi kept her eyes on the digital clock above the immigration counters. 9:17 p.m. 3 minutes later than she needed. Her jaw tightened, but only just. Most people in that line were thinking about hotel beds, delayed bags, or the text messages waiting on their phones. Naomi was thinking about timing, angles, and how fast a quiet mistake could become a national disaster. She had learned a long time ago that danger did not always announce itself with sirens. Sometimes it arrived in the form of a glance that lasted too long, a question asked with the wrong tone, a hand raised not to help, but to stop. "Ma'am, step out of line." The voice came sharp and flat, carrying above the low airport hum with practiced authority. Naomi turned slowly. Officer Derek Shaw was already moving toward her, broad-shouldered, expression locked, one hand near his belt, the other extended as if the decision had been made before he ever spoke. Beside him walked Officer Melissa Grant, tablet in hand, eyes narrowed with the kind of confidence that comes from believing your instincts are always right. A few travelers immediately looked away. Others leaned in. People always pretended not to stare right before they stared the hardest. Naomi did not flinch. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, her voice low and even, polished by discipline rather than fear. Derek gave a short, humorless smile. "That depends on how honest you plan to be." Melissa took the passport holder from Naomi's hand before she was invited to surrender it, flipping it open with brisk fingers. Her gaze moved from the page to Naomi's face and back again, lingering with visible doubt. "Travel patterns unusual," she said. "One-way routing, no checked bag, no declared contacts on arrival. You want to explain that?" Naomi's eyes returned to the clock. 9:18 p.m. "I want to get through immigration," she said. "And I'd advise you not to slow that down." Derek stepped closer. "That sounds like attitude." "No," Naomi replied, meeting his stare with a calm so complete it seemed to irritate him on sight. "That sounds like a warning." A murmur rippled through the line. Someone lifted a phone. Somewhere behind them, the scanner beeped again and again, a mechanical pulse against the rising tension. Derek's face hardened. In his eyes, Naomi could already see the story he had written about her. Too composed, too self-possessed, too certain of her place in a space he had decided was not hers. He didn't see a woman carrying a burden larger than anyone in that terminal could imagine. He saw someone he wanted to challenge. Melissa glanced at the screen in her hand, then at Naomi again. "You can come with us for secondary review." Naomi exhaled once, slow and measured, as though steadying something far bigger than herself. Then she said the one sentence that made both officers pause without understanding why. "If you interrupt what I'm here to do," she said, "you won't be able to put it back together." Officer Derek Shaw did not move right away, but the pause was brief, the kind that came when arrogance mistook itself for control. Then his mouth bent into a thin smile that never reached his eyes. "That is not how this works," he said, gesturing toward a frosted glass door marked secondary inspection. Around them, the line kept breathing in nervous little shifts. A man in a gray overcoat looked down at his boarding pass as if paper could protect him from discomfort. A college-age girl with a neck pillow hanging from her backpack lowered her phone for half a second, then raised it again. Naomi noticed all of it without appearing to notice anything. She picked up her carry-on and followed, not because they had earned her compliance, but because hesitation would cost more than dignity if she miscalculated the next 5 minutes. The room they led her into was small, overcooled, and painted in the kind of bland government beige that made every face look more tired than it already was. A wall clock ticked above a metal desk. There was no window, only the distant muffled echo of rolling luggage and public announcements bleeding through the sealed door. Melissa placed Naomi's passport on the desk and tapped the cover twice like she was daring it to explain itself. Derek remained standing. He liked the angle. He liked looking down. "Let us try this again," he said. "Who are you meeting in D.C.?" Naomi set her carry-on beside the chair, but did not sit. "No one you need to worry about." Derek exhaled through his nose. "Wrong answer." Melissa swiped through a screen, then frowned. "Your declared lodging does not match the transport history we are seeing." Naomi looked at her steadily. "Then your data is incomplete." That answer landed badly. Melissa's expression tightened, not because Naomi had raised her voice, but because she had not. Some people were threatened more by composure than defiance. Derek planted both hands on the edge of the desk and leaned in. "You came through immigration with no hesitation, no small talk, no confusion, no normal travel behavior. You expect us to believe that is not suspicious." Naomi finally pulled out the chair and sat down with measured grace, crossing one ankle over the other, as if she had chosen the room instead of being brought to it. "I expect trained officers to know the difference between unusual and unlawful." Silence hit the room like a held breath. Derek's jaw shifted. Melissa looked back at the tablet, searching for something that would make Naomi easier to reduce, easier to categorize, easier to dismiss. But Naomi had spent too many years moving through rooms exactly like this one. Rooms where authority often arrived before evidence and suspicion arrived before respect. She had learned that the most dangerous people were not always loud. Sometimes they were simply convinced. On the desk beside her passport was a sealed envelope, thin and plain, marked only by a small red stripe along the edge. Melissa reached toward it. Naomi's voice changed for the first time, dropping lower, firmer. "Do not open that." Melissa stopped, but only for a beat. "Why not?" Naomi held her gaze. "Because there are procedures in place for a reason." Derek laughed under his breath. "Now you want to talk about procedure." Naomi turned toward him slowly. "I have been talking about procedure from the moment you pulled me out of line. You just were not listening." The clock on the wall clicked forward. 9:21 p.m. Naomi felt the time sliding away with physical weight. Somewhere beyond these walls, someone was moving according to a schedule that did not care about airport ego, badge culture, or a room full of wrong assumptions. She had built contingencies for delay. She had built contingencies for surveillance. She had even built contingencies for internal leaks. But prejudice was always the most chaotic variable because it disguised itself as certainty and called itself instinct. Melissa tried another angle. "You said if we delayed you, people would answer for it. Was that supposed to scare us?" Naomi's expression did not change. "No," she said. "It was supposed to help you." For the first time, Derek's confidence flickered, not enough to soften him, only enough to sharpen him. He reached for the passport again, opened it flat, and stared at Naomi's photo as though the truth might confess itself if he looked hard enough. "I think," he said, voice cold now, "you are not telling us the real purpose of your entry." Naomi looked past him to the blank wall, hearing in her mind not the ticking clock but the final instruction she had been given hours earlier in a dim federal briefing room. "If anything goes wrong, do not reveal early, do not improvise emotionally, and, above all, do not let the target know you have seen him." Her eyes returned to Derek. Calm, unblinking. "You are right about one thing," she said. "You do not know why I am here." The room went quiet in a way that felt heavier than sound, the kind of silence that did not mean peace, only pressure. Officer Derek Shaw stared at Naomi Carter as if he could force an answer out of her by refusing to blink first. Melissa Grant stood off to the side with the tablet held tight against her chest, scrolling, cross-checking, searching for a discrepancy that would confirm what they had already decided. Naomi remained seated, posture straight, hands still, her carry-on resting beside her chair like the only thing in the room that had not mistaken tension for authority. The clock above the metal desk read 9:22 p.m. Every second now mattered in layers. On the surface, it was just another delay, another stop, another cold room where someone in power believed they had the right to turn a human being into a question mark. Underneath, it was something else entirely. Naomi knew that somewhere beyond the immigration barrier, past the polished floors and duty-free storefronts and tired families gathering their luggage. A man was moving through the terminal under a name that was not his own. He was not supposed to know she was here. He was not supposed to feel watched. And yet every extra minute in this room increased the odds that instinct, luck, or some barely visible signal would shift the entire operation off course. Derek finally straightened up from the desk, but his expression did not soften. "Then tell me something useful," he said. "Because right now all I see is a traveler with a strange pattern, a sealed envelope she does not want inspected, and an attitude that says she thinks she is above the process." Naomi lifted her eyes to him with the same steady calm that had unsettled him from the moment he first saw her in line. "You do not need to like my answers," she said. "You only need to understand that delaying me is the mistake here." Melissa let out a small, disbelieving breath. "You keep saying that like we are supposed to take your word for it." Naomi turned toward her. "No, I keep saying it because you are trained to recognize risk, and you are too busy reading me as a stereotype to see the one standing in front of you." The words landed hard, not because she raised her voice, but because she did not. Derek's face darkened. He was not a man accustomed to being named with such precision. Men like him preferred ambiguity when it came to themselves. Suspicion for others. Benefit of the doubt for their own motives. He took Naomi's passport again, flipping through the pages with visible impatience. Entry stamps. Transit records. Government issue formatting. Nothing dramatic. Nothing obvious. And that was exactly the problem. Naomi did not look disorganized enough to be guilty, nor nervous enough to be innocent in the way he expected innocence to look. She looked controlled, prepared, certain. To Derek, that certainty felt like a challenge. To Naomi, it was survival. Beyond the door, a muffled airport announcement rolled through the hall, almost impossible to make out, but familiar enough to stir memory. For a brief second, Naomi was no longer in the secondary inspection room. She was back in a secure conference room less than 4 hours earlier, seated beneath dim recessed lighting while a digital map of the terminal glowed across a screen. No names had been spoken above a careful register. No one in that room had wasted words. Special Agent Victor Hayes had stood at the front with both hands braced on the table, his voice quiet and exact. The target would arrive through a diplomatic lane adjacent to immigration, but would pivot through a public corridor if he detected surveillance. Naomi's task was simple only on paper. Blend in. Clear immigration without priority access. Track movement without contact. Confirm the exchange point. Do not reveal. Do not engage. If disrupted, activate nothing unless absolutely necessary. The reason had been made plain. They believed there was a leak somewhere between federal channels and airport operations. The fewer people who knew Naomi's role, the safer the mission. That was the theory. But theory had never had to stand in a room like this under the stare of two officers who had already decided what kind of woman she was the moment they saw her. "Secondary review request is not returning a clean match," Melissa said suddenly, frowning at the tablet. "There is a restricted flag attached to part of her record." Derek looked over. "Restricted by who?" Melissa tapped twice, then stopped. "It is not giving me agency detail." Naomi said nothing. Her silence was not dramatic. It was disciplined. Derek looked from the screen to Naomi, and for the first time uncertainty crossed his face without the cover of annoyance. It lasted only a second before pride rushed back in to seal the crack. "Flags do not impress me," he said. "People hide behind official language all the time." Naomi's gaze sharpened, just slightly. "And some people hide behind a badge." The room stilled again. Melissa looked up fast, her expression tightening. But there was something else there now, too. Something small and unwelcome. Doubt. Not about Naomi's confidence. About their own judgment. Derek stepped away from the desk and paced once toward the door, then back again, as if movement might help him recover the authority that had started slipping out of his grasp. "You think this is personal?" he asked. Naomi answered without hesitation. "I think you saw a black woman traveling alone, calm under pressure, and decided that confidence looked suspicious because it did not fit the story you wanted to tell about me." Neither officer replied. The clock ticked. 9:24 p.m. Naomi could feel the operation narrowing toward its next phase. Somewhere in the terminal, someone would soon check a reflection in glass, adjust a code, glance toward an exit, and decide whether tonight ended in silence or consequences. She could not afford to lose more time, but she also could not shatter the mission by reaching too soon. Then, from the desk, Melissa's tablet lit up with a hard red banner that had not appeared before. There was no sound, only color, but the effect was immediate. Melissa froze. Derek turned sharply. On the screen, above a sequence of access warnings neither of them had clearance to open, one line appeared in bold block letters. Hold subject. Federal override pending. Melissa Grant stared at the glowing red banner as if the screen itself had changed temperature in her hands. For the first time since Naomi had been pulled from the line, the certainty in her posture broke. Not loudly, not dramatically, just enough for the room to feel different. Officer Derek Shaw stepped closer and snatched a look at the tablet, his brow tightening as he read the words again, slower this time, as though repetition might somehow reduce their meaning. Hold subject. Federal override pending. The wall clock clicked to 9:25 p.m. Naomi did not move. She sat with the same measured stillness she had carried into the terminal, her face unreadable, her hands relaxed in her lap. But inside, the shift was immediate. A federal override was not supposed to happen this early. Not here. Not through airport-facing systems. Someone upstream had seen the interference, which meant either their protection net was working exactly as designed or the mission had already drifted close enough to failure that quiet channels were no longer sufficient. Neither possibility was comforting. Derek looked at Naomi and tried to recover the upper hand with irritation. Do not get too comfortable, he said. A flag is not an explanation. Naomi met his eyes. No, she said softly. It is what happens when a system finally catches up to a mistake. Melissa lowered the tablet a fraction. Who are you? She asked, and this time the question sounded different. Less accusing, more careful. Naomi did not answer right away. Beyond the sealed door, an announcement echoed through the corridor. Something about ground transportation and unattended baggage. Ordinary words drifting through an extraordinary moment. She listened for 1 second too long, then looked back at Melissa. Someone you should have let through 10 minutes ago. Derek exhaled sharply. He did not like the way control was slipping from him, and Naomi could see it all over him now. In the stiffness of his shoulders, the clipped rhythm of his breathing, the need to turn uncertainty into defiance before it could become shame. He pointed toward the sealed envelope on the desk. Open that, he said to Melissa. Naomi's voice cut across the room at once. Still low, still calm, and all the more powerful because of it. Do not. Melissa hesitated. It was a tiny delay, barely a second, but enough to expose a crack in the authority Derek had been leaning on all night. We cannot just sit here, he said. If she is bluffing, we are wasting time. Naomi looked at him with a stillness that made his sentence sound smaller the moment it left his mouth. You were wasting time the moment you mistook profiling for procedure. The words seemed to hang in the stale air between them. Derek turned away, pacing once toward the blank wall, then back, as though motion could rescue him from what the room had started to understand. Melissa stared again at the tablet. Additional lines were loading now, fragmented and incomplete, shielded by clearance blocks neither of them could pass. She swallowed before speaking. There is another note, she said quietly. It says no local questioning without federal presence. Derek stopped. Local questioning? He glanced toward Naomi, and for a brief instant something flickered behind his eyes. Not remorse. Not yet, but the first cold edge of realization. Naomi had seen that look before in other rooms, other agencies, other moments when people who had reduced her to a category suddenly sensed that the category had never fit. It never came with an apology first. It came with silence. Naomi rose from the chair then, slow and composed, and the movement alone seemed to reset the balance in the room. She did not tower over them. She did not need to. Listen carefully, she said. I am going to say this once, and I suggest you hear every word. Whatever assumptions brought me into this room are no longer your biggest problem. What matters now is how fast you stop making this worse. Derek opened his mouth, but before he could speak, there was a knock at the door. Not loud, not urgent, just firm enough to command attention. All three of them looked toward it. A moment later the handle turned, and a middle-aged airport supervisor in a navy blazer stepped halfway inside, face tight with the kind of discomfort that comes when lower-level authority finds itself brushing up against something larger. Officer Shaw, he said, carefully, We just received an internal request from Federal Operations asking that the traveler and secondary inspection remain untouched until a liaison arrives. Derek's expression hardened again, but now it was defensive rather than dominant. She is already being held. The supervisor nodded, eyes flicking briefly to Naomi and then away. Yes, sir. They also asked whether any sealed material had been opened. Melissa answered before Derek could. No, Naomi noticed the difference immediately. 10 minutes ago, Melissa had reached for the envelope like it was a prop in a performance of suspicion. Now she was protecting a chain of custody she did not yet understand. Fear could do that. So could conscience. The supervisor gave a small nod of relief and stepped back out, closing the door behind him. Silence returned, heavier than before. Naomi glanced at the clock. 9:27 p.m. somewhere in the terminal, the target would be approaching the first decision point. A corridor split. A camera angle changed. A courier hesitated. Timing was everything now, and Naomi hated being trapped in a room where truth had to wait for permission from people who had never earned it. Melissa looked down at the tablet again. Another line had appeared beneath the override banner. This one shorter, colder, and impossible to misread. Authorized contact en route. ETA, 2 minutes. Derek read it over her shoulder, and for the first time that night, he said nothing at all. The next 2 minutes stretched like wire. Nobody in the room seemed willing to breathe too loudly, as if sound itself might trigger whatever was coming through that door. Officer Derek Shaw stood near the desk with his arms folded tighter than before, jaw set, eyes fixed somewhere between Naomi Carter and the sealed envelope he had wanted opened just moments earlier. Melissa Grant remained by the tablet, but she was no longer scrolling with the same easy confidence. Now she read each line like it might rearrange her understanding of the night. Naomi stayed standing beside the chair, shoulders level, expression composed, though her mind had already moved beyond the room again. She could feel the mission clock, pressing in from all sides. At 9:28 p.m., the target should have been approaching the first internal checkpoint near the connecting corridor between international arrivals and the diplomatic transfer lane. If the courier kept to pattern, there would be a brief pause near a vending alcove that looked too ordinary to matter. If the courier broke pattern, then the delay here had already changed the shape of the operation. That was the danger no one in this room seemed capable of measuring. To them, time had been procedural. To Naomi, time was evidence, leverage, risk, and consequence all at once. Melissa finally looked up. If federal contact is that close, she said carefully, then why were we not notified ahead of time? Naomi turned toward her. Because advance notice broadens exposure. Melissa frowned. Exposure to who? Naomi held her gaze for a second, then answered with deliberate restraint. Exactly. The word landed with quiet force. Derek shifted his weight, irritated again now that uncertainty had begun to sound like accusation. So now we are supposed to believe there is some invisible threat moving through the airport, and you just happen to be part of it? Naomi did not react to his tone. You do not have to believe anything, she said. Reality does not depend on your comfort. Derek let out a short, bitter laugh, but it was weaker than before. You speak like somebody who thinks she cannot be questioned. Naomi's eyes sharpened. I speak like somebody who understands the difference between scrutiny and sabotage. The fluorescent lights overhead hummed faintly. Somewhere in the hallway, a baggage cart rattled past, then faded into the distance. Even the ordinary sounds felt sharpened now, every small detail edged by the pressure of what had not yet been said. Melissa glanced at the clock, then back to Naomi. You knew this might happen, did you not? Naomi did not answer at once. Her silence was not evasive. It was measured, almost surgical. I knew interference was possible, she said at last. I did not know it would look this careless. Derek's face hardened, but Melissa looked away. That sentence had found its mark. Naomi could see it in the way. Melissa's shoulders lowered by half an inch, in the way her grip on the tablet loosened as if the device had suddenly become heavier. Derek, on the other hand, was still fighting the truth with posture. Men like him often did. The badge came first, then the story they told themselves about what the badge meant, and only then, if ever, the human being standing in front of them. Naomi had met that hierarchy before in courtrooms, lobbies, checkpoints, conference halls, and federal buildings polished so bright they reflected power back at itself. She had learned not to confuse uniforms with discipline or confidence with competence. The knock came again, firmer this time. Before Derek could respond, the door opened and a tall man in a dark suit stepped in with the quiet authority of someone who did not need to announce rank because everyone around him felt it immediately. Special Agent Victor Hayes entered without hurry, silver at his temples, expression controlled, eyes scanning the room once before landing on Naomi. In that single glance, a whole conversation passed between them. She was still in place. The envelope was unopened. The local officers had done damage, but not irreversible damage. Victor turned to Derek and Melissa. Which one of you initiated the stop? The question was simple, but the room changed around it. Derek straightened. I did. Victor gave one short nod, neither impressed nor angry on the surface, which somehow made it worse. On what specific basis? Derek opened his mouth, then paused long enough for the weakness of his answer to become visible before he even spoke it. Unusual travel indicators. Behavioral concerns. Incomplete. Victor lifted a hand and the sentence died instantly. Do not pat it. His tone remained level. Tell me what justified removing her from the immigration line. For the first time that night, Derek did not seem to have language ready. Melissa looked down. Naomi watched in silence, not with satisfaction, but with the clarity of someone who had seen this moment too many times before. The moment when certainty collapsed under direct light. Derek tried again. Her responses were evasive. Victor's eyes moved too. Naomi, then back to him. Or disciplined. Derek said nothing. Victor stepped closer to the desk, saw the red override banner on Melissa's tablet, then the sealed envelope beside Naomi's passport. His expression did not change, but his voice cooled another degree. You detained a federally cleared operative during active movement inside a secured transportation hub. Melissa drew in a quiet breath. Derek looked like he had been shoved backward without anyone touching him. Victor continued, each word precise. You were instructed by System Flag not to question her. You were instructed by airport operations not to interfere further. And yet she is still in this room. Naomi said nothing. She did not need to. The truth was now standing on its own feet. Victor turned toward her. Agent Carter, status. Naomi answered immediately. Delayed 11 minutes from contact path. Envelope secure. No voluntary disclosure. Unknown whether target shifted route. Victor nodded once, then checked the time. 9:29 p.m. His jaw tightened for the first time. We move now, he said. Then he looked back at Derek and Melissa, and the weight of his next sentence seemed to drain the last illusion of control from the room. From this point forward, neither of you is to touch her documents, her property, or this investigation again. Victor Hayes did not waste another second. He crossed to the desk, picked up the sealed envelope himself, and handed Naomi her passport with the kind of quiet precision that said trust was not something he gave lightly, but once given, it did not shake. Naomi took both without a word, slipping the passport back into its worn blue holder and tucking the envelope beneath her arm. The room that had tried to contain her now felt too small to hold what was actually unfolding. Derek Shaw stepped aside, not out of courtesy, but because there was nothing left for him to stand on. Melissa Grant lowered the tablet to her side and watched Naomi as if she were seeing her for the first time, not as a problem to manage, but as a professional who had been forced to absorb humiliation in silence while the clock kept moving. Victor opened the door and motioned Naomi into the corridor. Brief me while we walk, he said. They moved fast through the fluorescent spill of the inspection area, past uniformed staff who suddenly found other things to look at, past travelers dragging carry-ons and families clustering near baggage signs, back into the cold, bright current of the terminal. Naomi matched Victor's pace exactly. Delay total is approximately 11 minutes, she said. No material breach. No early disclosure. But they were close to opening the envelope, and the target may have adjusted route if he observed disruption in the line. Victor gave a tight nod. You saw anything before the stop? Naomi scanned the terminal as they walked, eyes moving over reflections in glass, gate monitors, polished floor, clusters of waiting passengers, all while her voice stayed steady. One possible pre-contact marker. Male, mid-50s, olive overcoat, silver carry-on, no visible fatigue despite international arrival. He paused near the diplomatic corridor twice without checking signage. He was not lost. He was measuring. Victor absorbed that instantly. Courier or decoy? Unknown. but he was too still when everyone else was moving. Victor pulled a phone from inside his jacket, spoke one sentence into it, then put it away. No names, no details, just a command sharpened by urgency. Naomi knew the rhythm well. Good operations were never loud. They were clean, controlled, and terrifying only in hindsight. They passed a coffee kiosk where a barista was wiping down counters for the night, and for one surreal moment the smell of roasted beans drifted into the tension like a memory from another life. Naomi barely noticed. Her mind was already mapping the terminal again, overlaying the original plan with the disruption, recalculating sight lines, transfer points, and how a cautious target might respond to visible friction near immigration. The courier was supposed to commit at checkpoint 1, she said. If he saw officers pull me, he may skip to checkpoint 2 or abandon the handoff entirely. Or force it early, Victor said. Yes, Naomi replied. If he believes surveillance is narrowing. They turned into a quieter corridor where the airport. Lighting softened against darkened storefront windows. A television mounted near a closed travel shop played muted cable news to no one. A janitor pushed a cart past them, wheels squeaking faintly against the tile. Everything ordinary. Everything precarious. Victor slowed only once, just enough to look at Naomi directly. Can you still make visual confirmation? Naomi answered without hesitation. Yes. He studied her for a fraction of a second longer, as though measuring not her confidence, but the cost of what had just happened. You should never have been touched by local screening, he said. It was not an apology exactly, but it was the closest thing the system ever offered when it knew it had failed someone. Naomi kept walking. It was not local screening, she said. It was bias with credentials. Victor said nothing, and that silence told her he knew she was right. Ahead, the terminal widened again near a bank of glass walls overlooking the drop-off lane. Car lights moved like white and red ribbons beyond the window. A row of international flags hung still from the ceiling. Travelers sat charging phones beneath them, half asleep, unaware that somewhere within those same polished halls a classified operation was hanging by minutes and instinct. Naomi's eyes caught on a figure near a vending alcove, a man in an olive overcoat standing beside a silver carry-on, one hand in his pocket, gaze resting not on the machine but on the reflection in the glass panel beside it. Too composed, too detached. The same man. He was no longer pausing by chance. He was waiting. Naomi's stride changed by less than an inch, but Victor noticed. You have him? He asked. Possible visual, she said. 11 o'clock. By the vending alcove. Victor did not turn his head. Professionals never did when amateurs were watching. Do not break line, he murmured. We stay natural. Natural. The word almost made Naomi laugh if there had been any room left in her for humor. There was nothing natural about being mistaken for a threat because of the skin you wore, then expected to become invisible again the moment the truth arrived. But she knew what he meant. They kept walking, not too fast, not too slow, another pair of serious professionals crossing an airport at night. The man by the alcove shifted his weight and glanced toward the connecting corridor. A second man emerged there, younger, wearing a navy scarf and carrying nothing but a folded newspaper. Too clean, too empty-handed. Naomi felt the pattern click into place. It is a two-person transfer, she said under her breath. Scarf is the receiver. Victor's voice stayed level. You are sure? Naomi watched the younger man pass the alcove without looking directly at the older one. Watched the older man tap the handle of the silver suitcase, once with 2 fingers. Watched the younger man slow just enough to answer by adjusting the fold of the newspaper. There it was. Signal. Counter-signal. Clean, quiet, practiced. Naomi's pulse remained steady, but every nerve in her body sharpened. Yes, she said, and they are about to move. The older man with the silver carry-on did not look nervous. That was what made him dangerous. Nervous people checked exits too often, touched their pockets, swallowed too hard, moved like they were trying to outrun their own thoughts. This man did none of that. He stood beside the vending alcove as if he had every right to be there, one hand resting lightly on the suitcase handle, the other still buried in the pocket of his olive overcoat. The younger man in the navy scarf kept walking at first, eyes forward, newspaper folded beneath his arm, pace relaxed enough to pass for ordinary. But Naomi Carter had spent too many years studying the quiet language of people who believed subtlety made them invisible. She saw the half-second slowdown. She saw the answer in the newspaper fold. She saw the transaction beginning before either man technically moved. Victor Hayes kept his gaze ahead, his voice low and steady. "We do not stop them in the open unless they break pattern." Naomi nodded once. "The case will transfer first," she said. "Then the receiver will separate." They walked past a row of empty charging seats and a darkened souvenir stand where miniature monuments gleamed beneath half-dimmed display lights. The airport around them remained unaware. A woman in a red sweater rocked a sleepy toddler near the window. A businessman muttered into a phone about a hotel reservation. A cleaning crew moved through the far end of the corridor with yellow carts and expressionless efficiency. All of it ordinary. All of it happening inches away from the kind of moment that could tip a federal operation toward success or collapse. Naomi adjusted her stride, letting herself drift slightly toward the glass wall while Victor stayed nearer the center of the corridor. It was a small movement, natural enough to disappear inside airport flow, but it gave her a better angle on the reflection near the vending machine. The older man's fingers tapped the suitcase handle once. The younger man reached the alcove, pretended to glance at a snack selection, and lowered the folded newspaper to his side. Victor murmured into the microphone hidden near his collar, his tone so calm it sounded almost detached. "Visual confirmation on 2. Hold perimeter. No uniform presence. Wait for physical transfer." Naomi's pulse stayed level, but every sense sharpened. This was the strange thing about pressure. To people outside it, everything looked faster. Inside it, time stretched. Details grew louder. The scrape of a shoe against tile. The hiss of an air vent overhead. The faint rattle inside the vending machine when the younger man brushed the side panel with his elbow. Naomi saw the older man angle the silver carry-on just enough to expose the side pocket. Not wide, not obvious, just enough for a handoff that would look accidental to anyone not trained to see intention hidden inside routine. "Now," she said quietly. The younger man shifted the newspaper, and in that instant a slim dark packet moved from one frame to the next so cleanly it almost seemed imagined. But Victor had seen it too. "Move," he said. Everything that followed happened with discipline, not chaos. 2 plainclothes federal agents appeared from opposite ends of the corridor with the smooth timing of people who had rehearsed uncertainty for a living. One cut off the younger man's path near the connecting hallway. Another closed the distance behind the older man at the vending alcove. Victor stepped in from the front, calm, direct, impossible to ignore. Naomi moved to the flank, not touching either target, but tightening the space in a way that made escape suddenly theoretical. The younger man froze first, eyes widening not with panic, but with the shock of someone who had counted on invisibility and found none. The older man's face barely changed at all, yet his right shoulder tensed by half an inch, and Naomi knew he was calculating options that no longer existed. Victor spoke first. "Federal operations. Leave your hands visible and do not change position." No one raised a voice. No one rushed. That was the power of real authority. It did not need theater. The younger man looked past Victor, then toward Naomi, and something in his expression sharpened with recognition. Not of her name, of her role. He had seen her earlier. He had seen the stop at immigration. And now he understood what that delay had almost cost him. Naomi saw the realization pass through him like cold water. He had mistaken interference for opportunity. He had believed the woman detained in line was incidental. Instead, she had been the one thread holding the fabric together. The older man slowly removed his hand from his pocket, palm open, face composed in the way seasoned operatives used when emotion became liability. One of the federal agents reached for the silver carry-on and secured it without ceremony. Another took the folded newspaper. The younger man started to speak, then stopped when Victor looked at him. Not anger, not threat, just certainty. Nearby travelers had begun to notice now, though most could not understand what they were seeing. They only felt the sudden hush, the subtle redirection of movement, the way professionals had appeared out of nowhere and turned an airport corridor into a sealed line of consequence. A little boy near the window pointed toward the scene before his mother gently lowered his hand. A pair of college students stopped whispering. Even the janitor with the cart paused for 1 second, then kept moving. Life always did that. It kept going, even when history changed a few feet away. Naomi's eyes moved once to the silver suitcase, then to the Packet now sealed inside an evidence pouch. 11 lost minutes, and still the transfer had happened inside reach. They had not missed it. They had not broken. Victor turned slightly toward Naomi, and though his face remained controlled, there was something there now that had not been there in the inspection room. Respect, yes, but also something harder. Recognition of how close incompetence and prejudice had come to ruining everything. Good catch, he said. Naomi held the younger man's gaze for one final second. He changed timing, she replied. Not intention. Behind them, footsteps approached from the corridor they had just left. Naomi did not need to turn to know who it was. Derek Shaw and Melissa Grant had followed at a distance, drawn by the same thing that draws people to truth once it becomes too large to ignore. When Naomi finally glanced back, Derek had stopped several yards away, expression pale beneath the airport lights, eyes fixed not on the agents, not on Victor, but on the silver suitcase and the two men now standing silent under federal control. The full shape of his mistake had finally come into view. He had not delayed a traveler. He had interfered with a classified operation in the middle of an active transfer. And the black woman he had pulled from the line as if she were the problem had just helped end the threat he never even knew was there. For a long moment, no one in the corridor seemed willing to move more than necessary. The terminal lights reflected off the glass walls and pale ribbons, and the polished floor threw back fractured shapes of shoes, suitcases, and silent authority. The two men at the center of the operation now stood contained by the quiet precision of federal agents who did not need to raise their voices to make a boundary feel absolute. The silver carry-on had been secured. The folded newspaper was gone from the younger man's hand. The packet, small enough to disappear in a careless glance and dangerous enough to redraw careers, now sat sealed inside an evidence pouch beneath the steady grip of an agent who had probably handled more secrets than most people would see in 10 lifetimes. Naomi Carter remained where she was, breathing evenly, eyes clear, shoulders relaxed in a way that only came from long practice. She had not been rescued. She had been delayed, doubted, and nearly compromised, and still she had done what she came to do. That difference mattered. It always mattered. Victor Hayes gave a brief signal, and the team began to shift the scene with smooth discipline. One agent guided the older man toward a side corridor that had been cleared moments earlier. Another quietly redirected a cluster of curious travelers away from the alcove with a polite but immovable smile. From a distance, it probably looked like some minor airport security issue, something technical, something not worth understanding. That was the strange comfort of large public places. Truth could unfold in plain sight and still go mostly unseen by the people walking past it. Naomi turned as Derek Shaw and Melissa Grant came to a stop several yards away. Melissa's face had lost all of its earlier certainty. Her tablet now hung limp at her side, forgotten for the first time that night. Derek looked as though the airport had changed shape around him. He had entered the evening with the posture of a man who believed his instincts were a kind of law. Now he stood in the cold white light watching federal agents seal evidence from an operation he had almost derailed, and the law no longer looked like him. Victor approached them without hurry. "You should not be here," he said. His voice was level, but its restraint carried more force than anger would have. Derek swallowed once before answering. "We followed because we saw movement from the inspection area." Victor studied him for half a beat. "What you saw," he said, "was the consequence of interfering with something you were not qualified to interpret." Melissa looked down. Derek tried to hold Victor's gaze and almost managed it. "We were doing our job." Naomi heard the sentence and felt something inside her go still, not with surprise, but with recognition. Those words had covered too much for too long in too many rooms. Victor's expression did not change. "No," he said. "You were exercising suspicion without judgment, authority without context, and procedure without discipline. Those are not the same thing." The words landed harder because they were true. Derek had no answer ready now. Not one that could survive the corridor, the evidence, the witnesses, the time-stamped override, the airport supervisor, the unopened envelope, or the woman standing only a few feet away whom he had reduced to a problem the moment he saw her. Melissa spoke first, quietly. "We did not know." Naomi looked at her then, not cruelly, not triumphantly, just directly. "That is exactly the point," she said. "You did not know, but you acted like you did." Melissa's eyes flickered up and then away, And in that brief movement, Naomi saw the first real crack of conscience. Not enough to undo what had happened. Nothing could do that. But enough to make the truth hurt where denial had once protected her. Victor motioned for another agent, who approached with a slim folder and handed it over. He opened it, scanned one page, then addressed Derek and Melissa with the impersonal clarity of official consequence. Effective immediately, both of you are removed from any access related to this operation, its documentation, its surveillance material, and all connected terminals. Internal review has already been initiated regarding the detention, questioning, and attempted inspection of federally protected materials. Derek's face changed then, not dramatically, but in the slow, unmistakable way a man changes when his future begins moving without him. Internal review, he repeated. Victor closed the folder. You stopped the wrong person for the wrong reasons in the wrong place at the worst possible moment. He let the silence after that sentence do the rest. Naomi said nothing. She did not need to add heat to a truth already burning. Around them, the terminal continued in uneasy fragments. A gate announcement chimed overhead. Wheels rolled over tile. Far beyond the glass, headlights streamed along the drop-off lanes like white veins through the night. Life moved. It always moved. But for Derek, it no longer felt like the same night. He looked at Naomi at last, really looked at her, and the look carried none of the contempt he had worn in the inspection room. It carried confusion, embarrassment, and the terrible weight of realizing that the story he had told himself about her had collapsed under the simplest possible test, reality. Naomi held his gaze, and when she spoke, her voice was calm enough to cut clean. You saw my skin before you saw the threat. No one interrupted her. Even the terminal seemed to pause around the sentence. Derek opened his mouth, but no defense came. There was nothing left to hide behind. Not the badge, not the room, not the line at immigration, not the false confidence of a man who had mistaken bias for perception. Victor glanced toward the secured corridor where the two suspects had already disappeared from public view. Agent Carter, he said, you are needed for transfer confirmation and chain review. Naomi gave one small nod. Work first. Always. But before she turned away, Melissa spoke again, her voice low enough that it almost disappeared beneath the airport hum. I should have listened. Naomi looked at her for a moment, weighing the sentence not for sincerity alone, but for what it understood. You should have looked, she said. Listening would have come after. Then she turned and walked beside Victor toward the restricted hallway, past the vending alcove where the handoff had nearly vanished into ordinary life, past the reflection in the glass where the men had signaled each other, past the exact place where a delay born from prejudice had almost become a national failure. Behind her, Derek Shaw remained under the same cold lights he had once used to make someone else feel small. But the light did not belong to him anymore. It belonged to the truth, and the truth had finally learned his name. The restricted hallway beyond the public corridor felt like a different world, quieter, colder, stripped of the distractions that let ordinary people pretend power was always organized and fair. Naomi Carter walked beside Victor Hayes beneath recessed lights that cast clean shadows along the walls, the sealed envelope still tucked under her arm, her passport secure, her pace steady. Behind a reinforced door, agents were already beginning transfer confirmation, cataloging. The silver carry-on, the packet, the folded newspaper, the timestamps, the surveillance angles, the chain that linked one silent handoff to a network far larger than the two men caught in the terminal. Naomi knew how this part worked. Reports would be written. Screens would light up in offices miles away. Names would move across secure channels. People who had never stepped foot in that airport would soon speak in careful tones about success, exposure, liability, and prevention. But none of that changed what had happened in the first 11 minutes of the night, before federal systems corrected the room and before truth arrived wearing clearance. Victor pushed open a glass door leading into a compact operations suite where two analysts stood over a bank of monitors. One looked up immediately. Transfer confirmed, she said. Packet matches expected dimensions. Preliminary document layering suggests live material, not decoy. Victor nodded once. Naomi stepped to the nearest screen and saw the terminal replay already running in split view. Camera 1 showed the olive overcoat at the vending alcove. Camera 2 showed the receiver in the navy scarf approaching from the connecting corridor. Camera 3 showed something else. Immigration line. White lights. Rolling luggage. Officer Derek Shaw stepping into frame. Naomi, pulled aside before the exchange path ever had a chance to close naturally. The footage was silent, but it did not need sound. Bias had a body language of its own. Victor followed her gaze. That segment is being preserved separately, he said. Naomi did not look away from the screen. It should be. The analyst at the far console glanced between them, then lowered her voice. The delay almost pushed the receiver into the diplomatic lane. If that happened, recovery would have been much harder. Naomi let out a slow breath. Almost. So much damage in this country lived inside that word. Almost missed. Almost ignored. Almost believed. Almost ruined. Victor turned toward the analysts and began issuing quiet instructions about documentation, sealed review, and cross-agency notification. Naomi listened, answered when needed, confirmed the original. Checkpoint design, the altered timing, the signal sequence at the suitcase handle, the folded newspaper, the improvised recovery route. Every sentence she gave was exact. No wasted emotion. No dramatics. That was another thing people misunderstood about dignity. It was not silence because you had nothing to say. It was restraint because truth did not need performance to remain true. 15 minutes later, the formal transfer review was complete. Naomi signed one page, then another, the pen moving smoothly over lines that would outlast the terminal, the corridor, and the ignorance that had tried to block her. When she finally stepped back out toward the public side of the airport, the terminal had thinned into late-night stillness. Families were gone. The coffee kiosk was dark. A maintenance crew polished a stretch of floor that would reflect strangers again by morning. Near the immigration area, Melissa Grant stood alone beside an empty counter, her tablet gone now, her shoulders tired in a way Naomi recognized. She looked up as Naomi approached, then straightened as if unsure whether she had the right to speak. Naomi stopped, not because she owed anyone comfort, but because endings mattered. Melissa's voice came out quiet. I keep replaying it, she said. The line, the room, the way I looked at you before I knew. Naomi held her gaze. You knew enough, she said. You knew I was calm. You knew I was compliant. You knew there was no threat in my hands. What you did not know, you filled in with bias. Melissa absorbed that without argument. Across the hall, through the glass of a nearby office, Derek Shaw sat at a desk with no badge on his belt and no certainty left in his posture. A supervisor stood across from him, speaking in low, measured tones while paperwork waited between them like a verdict written in plain language. Derek looked up once, saw Naomi through the glass, and then looked down again. That was all. No plea, no speech, no defense. Just the unbearable stillness of a man finally forced to sit inside the consequences of his own assumptions. Naomi turned away from the office and looked toward the long, bright corridor leading out to ground. Transportation. The same airport. The same lights. The same polished floor. But not the same night. She had entered the terminal as a black woman carrying a mission the system could not afford to interrupt. She had been stopped by people who saw her skin before they saw her purpose. And yet the mission survived, the truth surfaced, and the lie beneath their authority broke under its own weight. Naomi adjusted her coat, stepped forward, and walked toward the exit with the same composure she had carried from the beginning, her reflection moving beside her in the glass like a witness that never blinked. Some people wear power like a uniform and think it gives them the right to decide who belongs. But that night, beneath the cold American lights of an airport built on rules, suspicion, and motion, the final truth was simpler than any badge could bear. He thought he was stopping the wrong woman, until justice kept walking and left him behind.